Sir, I'm sorry, the flight attendant said, her voice flat and firm. Could one old man's journey spark a terminal-wide stand? This flight is overbooked, and we'll have to ask you to wait for the next one. The old man paused, ticket in hand, shoulders straight, a small army pin on his worn jacket. Could a single act of respect change everything? He had booked this flight weeks ago, to see his granddaughter graduate, the only family he had left around him. The line moved on, no one looked twice, no one spoke until a quiet voice behind him said, "That's not how you treat people." And in that moment, everything changed, because sometimes the smallest act of respect can echo louder than any boarding call. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. Walter Jenkins shifted his weight on his wooden cane, steadying himself as the line moved inch by inch. He had learned long ago that patience was more than just waiting, it was a quiet kind of battle, one you waged without fanfare or fury. At 76, his battles weren't fought in trenches anymore, but they still left their marks. He wore an old army jacket. The olive color faded to a soft gray at the elbows, a single pin rested near the collar, a small badge that had once gleamed in the cold winds of Korea. His granddaughter used to ask him about it, her wide eyes full of wonder. He never told her everything. Some stories weren't meant for children, some stories stayed locked away in the silence of an old man's heart. But today wasn't about the past, today was about a promise he'd made to stand in the crowd when his granddaughter's name was called tomorrow, to see her smile and know even after all these years that he'd kept one more vow. The airport buzzed around him, voices tangled in a chorus of announcements and small talk. He stood apart from it all, his boarding pass folded carefully in his hand. The slip of paper was his bridge to Oregon. He wouldn't let it go. When his turn came at last, Walter stepped forward, his cane clicking lightly against the tile. The woman behind the counter, Samantha Rivers, wore a neat uniform and a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. She took his pass with practiced fingers, her gaze already drifting back to the screen. "Good morning, sir," she said, her tone as crisp as the pressed collar of her blazer. Walter offered a small nod. "Morning, miss," he spoke softly, the words shaped by the courtesy he'd learned in another life. The scanner let out a dull beep and Samantha's expression shifted, her lips pressed together in a faint line as she read the screen. Walter watched her, his breath steady. He'd faced harder looks than this. "I'm sorry, sir," she said finally, her voice polite but distant. "It seems this flight is overbooked. There's no seat available for you at this time." Walter's hand tightened on the cane. "Overbooked," the word tasted bitter on his tongue. "But I have a ticket, I need to be in Oregon tomorrow." Samantha gave a small sigh. "I understand, but we have priority passengers. You'll have to wait for the next available flight." He paused, weighing his words the way he'd once measured his steps in the snow-covered hills of Korea. "I bought this ticket weeks ago," he said, each word deliberate. "I'm not asking for special treatment, just the seat I paid for." The woman's smile didn't falter, but it didn't warm either. "Sir, I'm sorry, please step aside while I assist the next guest." Around them, the line crept forward. A man in a gray suit glanced at Walter with polite curiosity before turning back to his phone. A mother hushed her fidgeting toddler, her eyes flicking to the old man for just a moment. No one spoke up, no one wanted to disturb the quiet rhythm of departure. Walter's shoulders straightened. "I have to be there for my granddaughter," he said, softer now, almost to himself. "She's the only family I have left." Samantha didn't reply. She tapped at her screen, her fingers quick and mechanical. She had a job to do, and Walter was just another obstacle in the morning's checklist. He took a slow step back, the cane steady beneath his hand. His leg ached with the old wound he carried, but he didn't let it show. He never had. That limp was a part of him now, like the stories he didn't tell, the memories he carried close. His eyes shifted to the window beyond the gate. The sky outside was a pale blue, the sun still low, but bright enough to make the frost glisten like glass. It reminded him of the cold mornings he'd woken up in tents half a world away, the breath of winter in every lungful of air. He wondered if those years had taught him patience or if they had simply worn it into his bones. Either way, he didn't argue further. He knew when a fight wasn't worth the breath it took to speak. Samantha leaned closer to her coworker and murmured, "We'll hold that row for VIP. Let's not waste time here." Her voice was low, meant for someone else, but Walter heard it all the same. He didn't let the words sink in too deeply. Instead, he lifted his chin a little higher, his gaze steady. The world might have changed, but he hadn't. He still knew how to stand his ground, even if no one else was watching. Around him, the line moved on, each traveler a small story of departure and arrival. Walter stayed where he was for a moment, feeling the weight of it all. He didn't have many things left to fight for, but today he had one. He wouldn't let go of it, not for anyone, not for anything. Could this quiet stand inspire a stranger to act? Alex Morgan watched the scene unfold from a few feet away, his brow furrowing as he shifted the weight of his carry-on from one shoulder to the other. At 28, he had seen enough of the world to know when something was wrong, but he had also learned the hard way how easy it was to look away. He was on his way to a conference in Portland, the kind of meeting that would pad his resume and earn a polite nod from his boss, but none of that seemed important now, not when he saw the old man standing alone, Holding a ticket that should have been his bridge to someplace better, Walter didn't see Alex at first. His focus was on the woman behind the counter, the polite smile that had gone cold, but Alex saw everything, the way Walter's shoulders tensed with each quiet refusal, the way his hand tightened around the wooden cane. Alex took a breath, weighing his instinct to speak up against the part of him that said to keep moving, the part that said it wasn't his fight. He looked at Walter again, the faded army jacket, the quiet resolve in his posture. He thought of his own grandfather gone a decade now and how he would have wanted someone to stand up for him if he was in Walter's place. So Alex stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said, his voice level but firm. "He has a valid ticket. Doesn't that mean he has the right to board?" Samantha glanced at Alex, her smile tightening. "Sir, I understand your concern, but this is company policy." Alex frowned. "That's not an answer. He paid for that seat. You can't just take it away." Samantha shifted slightly, her voice taking on the patient edge of someone who didn't want to be challenged. "Sir, please don't involve yourself. We're following procedures." Walter turned then, his eyes meeting Alex's. There was a flicker of surprise there, a quiet gratitude, but he shook his head with a soft, worn-out smile. "Thank you, son," he said, his voice low and calm, "but I don't want to cause trouble. My granddaughter's waiting for me in Oregon. If this is how it is, I'll find another way." Alex couldn't accept that. "This isn't trouble," he said. "This is about respect, about doing what's right." Samantha's expression hardened a fraction. "I'm sorry," she said again, but the words felt empty in the sterile air of the terminal. "Please step back and let me assist the other passengers." Alex glanced around, hoping to see someone else, anyone willing to step in, but the other travelers kept their eyes down, fingers busy scrolling through glowing screens, the silence of polite indifference settling like a fog. A young woman with a baby in her arms looked at Walter, her eyes soft with something like apology, but she turned away without saying a word. A businessman checked his watch, already impatient to board. Walter drew in a quiet breath, his shoulders still straight despite the weight pressing down on him. He leaned a little more on the cane, but his gaze was far away, as if he was seeing something beyond the rows of seats and fluorescent lights. Alex watched the old man's face, saw the lines there, each one a story he would never hear, and in that moment, he knew he couldn't just stand by. "This isn't how you treat people," Alex said, his voice carrying more edge now. "Not someone who served this country, not someone who paid for his place, just like everyone else." Samantha looked past him, her expression tight. "Sir, if you continue to interfere, I'll have to ask you to leave the boarding area." Alex ignored the warning. He turned to Walter, his tone softening. "You shouldn't have to fight this alone." Walter met his eyes and gave a small shake of his head. "It's kind of you to care," he said, "but sometimes the fight is just too heavy for one day." Alex felt a flush of frustration rise in his chest. He thought of his grandfather again, the stories he'd only half understood when he was younger, stories about duty and quiet courage, about never letting someone stand alone when the world tried to push them down. He looked back at Samantha. "I'd like to speak to a supervisor," he said, his tone flat and unyielding. Samantha's lips parted as if to argue, but she hesitated. For a moment, the confidence wavered in her eyes, the smooth mask slipping just enough for Alex to see the doubt underneath. "Please," he said again, the word not a question, but a quiet demand. The woman glanced at her coworker, then gave a small nod and stepped away to make a call. The moment she left, the hush around them deepened, the murmur of voices dropped, replaced by the soft squeak of suitcase wheels and the distant crackle of announcements. Walter's eyes drifted to the window where a plane was taxiing across the tarmac, its tail cutting through the pale sky. For a heartbeat, his face was caught in the reflection of that bright morning light, and Alex thought he looked like a man half in this world and half somewhere else. "I was in Korea," Walter said softly, as if he were speaking to no one in particular. 51. Winter was the worst of it. "You learn then that you don't always get to choose your battles." Alex didn't know what to say. He only nodded, letting the silence hold the weight of those words around them. The other passengers shifted uneasily, some watching from the corners of their eyes, others pretending not to see. Samantha returned, her expression carefully neutral. "The supervisor is on another matter at the moment," she said, her voice crisp. "I'm afraid there's still no seat available for this passenger." Alex drew in a steady breath, feeling the pulse of the moment settle into his bones. He could see it in the lines of Walter's shoulders, the way the old man leaned into the cane like it was the only thing keeping him from slipping away. He could see the quiet resolve there, the refusal to bow even when the world wanted to push him down, and in that instant, Alex made his choice. "If your airline won't respect him," he said, his voice low but carrying, "then I'll give up my seat." "Let him have it." The words hung in the air, sharp enough to cut through the hum of the terminal. A ripple of surprise moved through the small crowd gathered nearby. Even Samantha blinked, the mask of professionalism slipping for just a moment. Walter's head turned, his eyes widening. "Son, you don't have to do that," he said, his voice catching on something like disbelief. Alex shook his head. "I do," he said simply, "because someone needs to remember what's right." For a heartbeat, Everything seemed to hold its breath, the quiet whir of suitcase wheels, the echo of voices over the PA system, the muted footsteps of hurried travelers, all of it faded, leaving only the old man, the young man, and the truth of what had just been offered. Walter's shoulders straightened a little more, the weight of his years still there, but softened by something else, something almost like hope. And in that fragile moment, the silence spoke louder than any announcement. Alex squared his shoulders and met Samantha's eyes with a calm steadiness. "I'll wait for another flight," he said. "He's waited long enough." Walter blinked once, his breath hitching, and then he did something he hadn't done since he arrived at that gate. He smiled, a small, worn smile, but real. No one in that waiting area said a word, no one needed to in that moment. They all saw what respect looked like, and for Walter Jenkins, it was enough. For now, Alex's offer to give up his seat had left the terminal wrapped in a stunned kind of quiet. Samantha hesitated, her mouth half open as if she wanted to argue, but couldn't quite find the words. Around them, the passengers who'd been avoiding eye contact now stared openly, their curiosity edged with something softer, maybe respect. Walter looked at Alex with a mixture of disbelief and quiet pride. "Son," he said, his voice almost a whisper, "that's more than I can ask. You've done enough." Alex shook his head. "It's not about me," he said, "it's about what's right." But before Samantha could find her footing again, another voice cut through the hush, calm, clear, quiet, but with the kind of authority that settled a room. "Excuse me," the voice said, and a woman stepped forward from the crowd. She was in her 40s with neatly cropped dark hair and a coat that looked like it had seen 1,000 airports but hadn't lost its edge. Her eyes were sharp, taking in every detail. The boarding passes in Walter's hand, the way Samantha's shoulders had stiffened at the challenge, the quiet determination in Alex's expression. "I'm Olivia Harris," she said, her voice carrying just enough weight to remind everyone she wasn't to be ignored. "I'm with the Federal Aviation Administration. May I ask why a paying passenger with a valid ticket is being denied his seat?" Samantha's face paled, her practiced smile faltering for the first time. "I am sorry, ma'am, I didn't realize you were here. It's just that this flight is overbooked and we have a VIP manifest to prioritize." Olivia held up a hand, cutting through the excuses like a blade. "I'm aware of what overbooking looks like," she said, her tone level. "What I'm not aware of is any policy that allows you to strip a seat from a passenger who purchased it in good faith, especially when he's already checked in." Her words dropped into the silence like a stone. No one moved. Samantha swallowed, her mouth working soundlessly as she tried to pull the pieces of her explanation back together. Walter's grip on his cane tightened, but he stood a little straighter, the badge on Olivia's lapel, the quiet steel in her voice. It reminded him of the way his commanding officer had looked before a mission, calm, certain, ready to do what was needed, no matter the noise around them. "Ma'am," Samantha tried again, her voice wavering, "this is just standard practice. We're only trying to follow company policy." Olivia shook her head. "I've read every policy your company has on record," she said, "and I can tell you right now, there's no line, no clause, no loophole that allows you to treat this man as anything less than the paying customer he is." Samantha's face flushed, her hands tightening on the edge of the counter. She looked from Olivia to Alex, then back to Walter, and something in her shoulders sagged. She knew everyone did. Olivia's eyes softened just a fraction as she looked at Walter. "Sir," she said, her voice gentler now, "would you mind showing me your ticket again?" Walter fumbled for a moment, unfolding the worn slip of paper from where it had been tucked carefully into his coat pocket. He held it out with a slight tremor in his fingers, the paper crinkling softly. Olivia took it, scanning the details quickly. "Seat 17A, she said, her voice even. "A window seat reserved and paid for." She turned back to Samantha, her tone hardening once more. "I want this documented. I want a report filed on why Mr. Jenkins was denied boarding, and I want him on this flight now." Samantha's cheeks went a deeper red. "Yes, ma'am," she said, her voice small. The quiet in the terminal was thick enough to feel every eye was on them now, on the woman in the FAA badge, the old man with the steady gaze, the young man who had offered his place without hesitation. Alex let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He looked at Olivia with gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for making this right." Olivia met his gaze and gave a small nod. "Sometimes," she said softly, "doing what's right doesn't come from a policy or a procedure. It comes from remembering that every seat has a story, and every story deserves respect." Walter's eyes glistened, though he blinked quickly, fighting the sudden sting of emotion that rose in his chest. He had been fighting battles his whole life, some with rifles and mud, some with the silent weight of memory. But this quiet stand for dignity, it was a battle worth remembering. Samantha lowered her head, her voice a low murmur. "Yes, ma'am, I'll make the arrangements right away." As she turned to her computer, fingers flying across the keys, Olivia stepped back and turned her attention to Walter. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, her voice carrying that calm certainty once more, "you'll be on this flight. I'll make sure of it." Walter drew in a slow breath. "I appreciate that," he said, his voice rough with more than just age. "I wasn't sure if anyone would see me today." Alex put a hand lightly on his shoulder. "They see you now, sir." and so do I. Walter looked at him and gave a small, withered smile. It was a smile that spoke of relief, of gratitude, of something deeper than either of them could put into words. Olivia turned to address the small cluster of passengers who had gathered closer, drawn by the quiet drama unfolding at the gate. There's been a misunderstanding, she said. Her voice measured but warm. Mr. Jenkins is a paying passenger with every right to board this flight. Thank you for your patience. No one spoke, but in the hush that followed, something shifted. A mother holding a sleepy toddler gave a small, almost shy nod of agreement. A man in a dark business suit cleared his throat and looked away, his expression thoughtful. The moment stretched, and then from somewhere in the back, a single pair of hands began to clap, soft at first, but sure. Then another joined in, and another. It wasn't a standing ovation, it wasn't loud or raucous, but it was real. Walter's eyes shone as he straightened his back, the ears heavy, but not enough to bow him. Olivia gave him a small smile. Go ahead, sir, she said. Seat 17A is waiting. Alex stepped aside and Walter moved forward, the cane steady under his grip. The gate agent who had been watching all along reached out to take his boarding pass, his voice quiet. Have a good flight, sir, he said. And this time the words sounded genuine. Walter nodded, and with one last look at Alex, at the young man who had refused to let him be forgotten, he stepped through the gate. As he disappeared down the jetway, the quiet applause faded into a hush once more, but the warmth of it lingered. Alex turned to Olivia. You didn't have to do that, he said, his voice quiet with respect, but I'm glad you did. Olivia's expression softened, her eyes steady. We're all just stewards, Mr. Morgan, she said. It's stewards of the rules, but more importantly, stewards of each other. Samantha kept her head down as the last of the passengers boarded, her cheeks still pink with the flush of shame. She didn't meet anyone's eyes, but as Walter's figure slipped from view, there was a hint of something else in her face, something like understanding. The boarding area settled into a quiet once more, the lines moving forward, the day pressing on. But for those who had seen it, the old man with the quiet dignity, the young man who refused to look away, and the woman in the badge who spoke not with anger, but with respect, it was a moment that would linger far longer than the flight itself. Walter Jenkins had a seat, and for one day, in one small corner of the world, respect had found its voice again. The steady rumble of the engines filled the cabin with a comforting hum. Alex settled into the seat beside Walter, his briefcase tucked beneath his feet. The airline had found him another seat at the last minute, one row back, but he'd insisted on staying here. It felt right somehow. Walter adjusted the seatbelt across his lap, his fingers brushing the worn buckle with care. He turned to Alex, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the cabin lights. I've lost too many good men, he said, his voice a low rumble. Too many friends in places where the cold never ended, and the sky always felt too far away. He paused, the memories in his gaze far older than the lines on his face. I didn't want to lose my faith in people, too, he added quietly. Not after all these years. Alex let his shoulders relax, his own breath easing out in the hush of the cabin. You don't have to, sir, he said, his voice steady but warm. What you did today, standing your ground, holding on to that quiet strength, it reminded me that kindness doesn't die just because some people forget it. Walter looked at him, a soft smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You're a good man, Alex, he said simply. Your grandfather would have been proud. Alex lowered his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of that blessing settle into his chest like a promise. He nodded once, letting the truth of it sit between them. A few rows ahead, Olivia Harris stood in the aisle, her badge tucked back beneath the collar of her coat. Before she stepped off the plane to handle paperwork on the ground, she paused beside Samantha, who was helping another passenger find an overhead bin. Olivia's voice was quiet, but it carried the kind of calm authority that stayed long after the words were gone. It's not just about procedures, Samantha, she said, it's about remembering that every ticket, every passenger carries a story. That's what we're here to honor. Samantha didn't argue, her cheeks still flushed with the memory of her mistake, but her eyes lifted to meet Olivia's with a new awareness. I understand, she said, her voice soft, but sure, I won't forget it. Olivia gave her a single nod, then stepped back, letting the hush of the cabin fold around her as she prepared to leave. The plane was ready to taxi, and there was nothing more to be said. As the engines roared to life, Alex leaned back, letting the gentle vibration of the plane settle into his bones. Outside, the sky had softened into the gold of late afternoon, the kind of light that felt almost like a blessing. Walter turned his face toward the window, his eyes tracing the fading line of the horizon. In the glass reflection, Alex could see the hint of a smile there, small but real. The plane lifted, the ground dropping away beneath them. Alex felt the weight of the day ease from his shoulders, replaced by something lighter, something like hope. Walter didn't say much as they climbed higher into the sky. He sat quietly, his hand resting on the armrest, his gaze following the curve of the world beyond the window. But Alex could see it in the set of his shoulders, the soft ease of his breath. The old man was lighter. He leaned a little closer, his voice low. Where are you headed, Alex? He asked. Alex smiled faintly. Portland for work, but I think today taught me more than any meeting ever could. Walter let out a quiet breath, the ghost of a chuckle in the sound. It's the little things that teach us most, he said. The little kindnesses, the small stands, that's what holds us all together. Alex nodded. You're right, sir, and I think that's what I'll remember most about this flight. Walter's eyes turned back to the window, the last light of day casting a soft glow across his face. I've been on a lot of flights, he murmured. Some were longer, some were harder, but this one reminded me that even when the world feels cold, there are still warm places left. He didn't say more after that. He didn't need to. The plane leveled out, the seatbelt signs dimming, a soft chime echoed through the cabin, and the flight attendants moved down the aisle with quiet efficiency. Around them, passengers settled in, conversations hushed, a soft cocoon of travel wrapping them all together. Alex leaned back in his seat, his eyes half closed. He thought of the way Walter had stood at that gate, the quiet dignity in his voice, the refusal to let go of what mattered, and he thought of the way Olivia had spoken, not with anger, but with the kind of respect that left no room for argument. He let the hum of the engines wash over him, a gentle reminder that the world could be loud, but there was still space for quiet strength. Beside him, Walter sat still, his breath slow and even. He didn't look tired anymore, he looked at peace. As the plane began its gentle descent, Alex turned to him once more. Where's the graduation being held? He asked softly. Walter's eyes brightened, his smile widening just a fraction. Small college in Eugene, he said. She's the first in our family to finish school. I promised her I'd be there no matter what. Alex nodded, his chest tightening in a way that felt good. She's lucky to have you. Walter chuckled low. I'm the lucky one, he said. I get to see her dreams take flight. Outside the window, the world was turning soft and golden, the last rays of sun painting the clouds in gentle hues of pink and orange. It felt like a blessing, a quiet promise that even after everything, there was still beauty left to see. When the wheels touched down on the runway in Oregon, Walter closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the quiet sigh of arrival. The small jolt of landing wasn't enough to shake the calm he carried in his chest. Alex waited until the plane had taxied to a stop, then turned to Walter one last time. Take care of yourself, sir, he said, his voice warm. And thank you for everything. Walter gave him a nod, his eyes brightened. Sure, thank you, Alex, he said, for reminding me that kindness never really goes away, it just waits for the right moment to shine. They rose together, the aisle filling with the slow shuffle of people gathering bags and stretching limbs. Alex watched as Walter moved down the aisle, the wooden cane steady under his grip, his step sure and unhurried. At the door, the flight attendant smiled at him. Have a wonderful day, sir, she said softly. Walter nodded. I already have, he said. Outside the airport, the world moved on to cars and buses, travelers, and quiet skies, but for Walter Jenkins, the journey wasn't just measured in miles, it was measured in the kindness he'd seen, the quiet dignity he'd reclaimed. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, the weight of the years felt a little lighter. His granddaughter was waiting, his promise was kept, and somewhere deep inside, he knew that the wounds of old wars didn't have to be the end of the story, not when there were still people who remembered how to stand up, still people who knew that sometimes the quietest stands were the ones that mattered most. And in that quiet strength, a single truth held steady, one that Walter carried with him as he walked toward the light of Oregon sky: there would always be those who chose what was right, even when no one was watching, and because of them, the world would always hold a place for hope. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way. Often in the quietest places, not everyone who helps wants recognition, some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.